All right, so in this video, we're going to continue going through post-classical China. Different pen so it doesn't go out on me. In the previous video, we looked at some of the economic characteristics of post-classical China. And remember, when we're talking about post-classical China, we're talking about the Tang and Song dynasties. So what we're going to look at today are some of the social and cultural characteristics. So let's look at some of the social stuff first. So like we've seen just about everywhere else, including China, patriarchy is a big deal. And it's not really any different in China. In fact, the patriarchy is reinforced as we move into the post-classical period in time period 3. So patriarchy is reinforced. We see this in a couple of ways. First, ancestor veneration, which was always pretty patriarchal because it was run by the male head of the household, the oldest male member of the family. Ancestor veneration changes somewhat in that what you want to do now is you want to venerate or honor the oldest male ancestor. So you want to find in your family tree the oldest male ancestor, and that's who you're going to devote your attention to. So before this, it used to be your ancestors in general, male, female, recently deceased, really past ancestors. But now ancestor veneration has evolved to kind of worship the oldest male ancestor. So we're kind of turning ancestor veneration into something that resembles a little bit more like a religion. So obviously your oldest male ancestor is not a god, but you're now devoting all of your attention, all of your worship to this particular person as opposed to your ancestors in general. Another way that patriarchy is reinforced is through the process of footbinding. So footbinding is a really awful practice that reinforces patriarchy. So in post-classical China, small feet on women were considered attractive. So families did what they could to make their daughters more attractive to potential husbands. So you want to get rid of your daughters. Your daughters are not useful to you if you're a kind of middle class Chinese family. Your daughters aren't all that useful to you. So you want to get them married out so that they're no longer your burden. They're the burden of their husband now. So you want to do everything you can to make your daughters attractive to potential husbands. And usually these potential husbands are richer than you. So foot binding is typically done by kind of upper middle class people, hoping to become like upper class. Like they're middle class people, but they're hoping to become upper class people. So here's what foot binding entails. And it's not for the squeamish. This is kind of gross and violent. So basically what foot binding entails is that you essentially break the feet of little girls. So usually somewhere between like maybe 3 to 4 years old. So you kind of put their foot down. I'll try to draw it as best I can. You kind of put their foot down on, you'll note my horrible artwork here. So if that's the foot, you kind of put the foot down on 2 bricks or something like that, and you crack the foot with a hammer. And so you break these bones that kind of go across the top of the foot. Then, once the foot is broken, you fold the foot in half. So you kind of fold the foot over. So if this is like your foot, you're kind of folding your foot underneath. So that the toes, so if my fingers, imagine my fingers are the toes, you're kind of folding the toes underneath. So the foot kind of now looks like this, like a fist. So you fold the foot in half, it's broken. So the broken foot, you kind of force it in half, and you bind it this way with bandages. And you treat it with like caustic chemicals to cause some of the flesh that's dying, it's going to die, some of the flesh to rot off. And eventually, the foot heals in this kind of misshapen state. And once you do this, your foot is considered attractive. This is an attractive, small foot. And the hope is that now you can marry these people or marry your children off to potential husbands, and they'll take them off your hands for you. If you look in the module for this chapter, there's a couple of pictures of feet that were bound. And notice that they are photographs. So this practice continued on well into the 20th century when the communists eventually outlawed the practice and you don't see it anymore. But it was still happening well into the 20th century. Now, there are a couple of other points I want to make about foot binding. So this was a way that women could be used to rise up in social status. So this was a method of social movement. So this was a method of social mobility. Now, again, remember that we're only talking about maybe upper middle class or upper class women who want to go up in society. We very rarely see this in lower class families. And that's because the women in these families were needed to help do work. You needed them to help farm or work the trade or whatever it is that you're doing. But if you're a lower class family, you can't afford to have your women's feet broken in this way. But if you're upper class, what this does to upper class women become dependent on their husbands or their sons to move around because their feet are broken. Their feet are permanently disabled. And so if they want to walk, it requires help. And so this absolutely reinforces patriarchy in maybe the most obvious and direct way, because women need men to even walk around. If women want to go somewhere, they have to get their male relatives to help them. So these upper class women are totally dependent on their male family members. And remember that this is pretty much just seen amongst middle class or upper middle class or upper class women. We very rarely see this among lower class women because despite there being patriarchy, we need everyone to help. Otherwise, we're going to starve to death. So we need those women to help work. Otherwise, we're not going to make any money. Only those families that can afford to do this can do it, and they do it mostly for social mobility. So they can rise up higher than their current status. Okay, so another thing that we're going to talk about here is some cultural diffusion. And this is mostly due to trade routes. So what we're going to see happen in China is that there's going to be some new religions introduced and kind of take root in China. Now, this coincides with the collapse of the Han Dynasty. So when the Han Dynasty collapses, at roughly the same time, Buddhism is introduced through Indian Buddhist merchants. So, why are these merchants Buddhists? Remember that even though the religion of Buddhism is ascetic, so this is definitely an ascetic religion, it also helps people with their daily lives. So if you remember the ideas about Buddhist temples, it helps people with daily lives. And so for a lot of merchants used Buddhist temples as rest stops, or I guess you might call them hotels or inns along the way. And a lot of merchants picked up Buddhism not because it's ascetic, but because, it was helpful to people. Like the idea of a Buddhist temple was very useful in the day-to-day life of a merchant. And, if along the way you also try to have less suffering in your life, well, that's nice too. So a lot of merchants were Buddhists, and as they moved into China, they brought Buddhism with them. So these guys brought Buddhism to China. Now, when Buddhism is introduced to China, the Chinese are kind of down on Confucianism. Why are they down on Confucianism? Well, the Han Dynasty just collapsed. And the whole basis of the Han Dynasty was that it centered on Confucianism. And if it just failed, well, maybe that's a failure of Confucianism too. So at roughly the same time, Confucianism failed, Buddhism comes in, and the people of China are like, maybe we'll give this Buddhism thing a try. So the Chinese seem to be open to a new philosophy because Confucianism maybe failed. But also remember that Buddhism is helpful. Like Buddhist temples help people in their day-to-day lives. So not only is this new philosophy kind of interesting and attractive, but Buddhist temples are also helping people in their day-to-day lives. So, as we've said before, these Buddhist temples act as like emergency food stores. They act as schools because Buddhism is a very it's a very literate religion. There's a lot of reading in Buddhism. So if you want to become Buddhist, it helps to know how to read the texts. Remember, they also act as banks and lenders of land. They're also famous for bringing the chair to China. So they brought the chair to China. The chair was a piece of furniture that monks sat in. It was a thing that were in Buddhist monasteries, and they weren't known in China. They usually sat on the ground or on pillows in China, and so the the Buddhists brought the chair to China, which is pretty comfortable. Anybody who sat in a chair knows that chairs are pretty comfortable, and you can thank the Buddhists for bringing those to China. So the Chinese were very open to this new philosophy, and over time, it was kind of adopted by the Chinese and adapted to Chinese ideas. So it kind of incorporates the philosophies that were already there. So it's going to kind of use some Taoist, I guess we can say, vocabulary. So, for example, like the idea of following the Buddhist philosophy, following the Buddhist rules, Dharma, kind of starts to take on the ideas of the Tao. And so these two words kind of become synonymous. But the bigger adoption by the Chinese is seen as it kind of merges with Confucianism. So Buddhism and Confucianism kind of merge into this new thing called NeoConfucianism. And what NeoConfucianism is a mixture of Confucian philosophy and Buddhist spirituality. So we're going to keep all the rules and the roles of Confucianism, and we're going to add in some spiritual parts of Buddhism. Now, this is just my idea. So this is not an official thing, but the way I kind of think about it is that the Buddhism part of Neo-Confucianism kind of adds an unofficial sixth relationship. It kind of gives us a relationship between you and the universe. So in addition to the other ones about your day-to-day life, Neo-Confucianism kind of gives you this new relationship with rules between you and the universe. Now, like I said, this is just Mr. Nissen saying that that's not an official thing, but it kind of puts all of this into perspective. We're still talking about Confucianism, and we're still talking about Buddhism. And to kind of put the Buddhist stuff in the vocabulary of Confucianism, kind of think about it as another relationship. Now, we do have one other part of this that we need to talk about, and that's how the Taoists and the Confucianists felt about all of this. Because neither Taoists nor Confucianists liked Buddhism. So the Buddhists are the ones who are doing this. But if you were already in China and you were a Taoist or you were a Confucianist, you did not like Buddhism. The Taoists didn't like it because it's kind of too similar to Taoism. And it steals resources and people who might become Taoists away from Taoism and to Buddhism. But the Confucianists don't like it for another reason. The Confucianists don't like it because Buddhism requires celibacy. So no marriage. You can't be married. You also can't have any special hugs. It requires celibacy because celibacy or marriage requires attachment and desire. And the whole point of Buddhism is to get rid of that stuff. And the Confucianists say, well, hold on, we can't have somebody coming in here saying no families and no children, because the whole point of Confucianism is relationships within families. Like most of the relationships, father to son, husband to wife, brother to brother, all of that requires a family. And Buddhism is now coming in and saying no families, no relationships. So the Confucianists and the Taoists don't like Buddhism. So at first, Buddhism has a very rocky relationship in China. And the Tang Dynasty actually tries to outlaw it. It doesn't work because the people like Buddhism, but the Tang Dynasty does try to get rid of it. The Tang Dynasty tries to outlaw Buddhism, but by the time they actually try to outlaw Buddhism, it's too popular. And the people continue to practice it, even though the government says it's illegal. All right, so we're going to stop there. We've got one more video on this period in China, and this one's going to take us outside of China for the first time, and we're going to see what's going on around China. So we're going to see what was Chinese influence on Korea, on Vietnam, and especially on Japan. So our next video will see what kinds of influences China has on the rest of East Asia. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.